to me, I don't believe a word. Don't try to make me feel alright.
Holy smokes.
Shot.
Where
Shot
are we,
time.
man? Are we in like an undisclosed basement location or bunker?
Lair.
The secret lair.
This is
The
the
wolf's lair.
bomb shelter.
Bomb shelter.
All right. Slancha
Slunka.
Paul, come on.
Oh, God.
Slancha Gomra.
Yeah.
Health to the women.
Cheers.
And strength to the men. Is the old
Oh, my God.
Celtic saying, Gaelic saying.
So,
Woo! Ah,
it's good, huh?
I might throw up.
Please don't.
My indigestion is
Trash can's right up there, or you can make it outside.
So, we're going to talk about Secession. This is the American Reckoning podcast. And my name is Paul, and this is Todd, and this is Aaron. And this is kind of part 2 of Secession, and we might even talk about Lee Jackson too, and how that went. We might even start off with that, I guess.
Lee Jackson Day.
Yeah. But we have our American Reckoning podcast. You go to @American Reckoning on YouTube, and we've also just put something up on Rumble, so you can go check us out on there. And so we are in a recording studio, and it's pretty cool with all the guitars. And Aaron does play some guitar, and he's pretty darn good at it. And so yeah, why don't we talk about Lee Jackson first? That would be Robert E. Lee and Thomas
Jonathan
Jackson Stonewall. So why is that important, and what did we just do?
Well, Lee Jackson Day had been a holiday in Virginia for a century or so.
Yeah.
I don't remember when it was first started, but not too long after the war, I'm sure. And it was held in Lexington because they're both buried there. Unfortunately, the carpetbaggers and scallywags in Virginia, in control of the government, did away with Lee Jackson Day a few years ago. Now, we don't need their permission or their creation of a, holding with a holiday to celebrate it. So the Sons of Confederate Veterans Stonewall Brigade in Lexington holds this annual event, and the Virginia Flaggers also support this event, and they have almost a whole weekend of events going on, speakers, services at the cemetery, a parade. And this year was one of the biggest attendant ones there's been. There was probably 500 people in that parade,
Yeah.
and at that service Saturday morning at the cemetery. It's always well done.
COVID probably kept the numbers down a little bit, but also people just maybe not. They're kind of scared to come out and support their Confederate ancestors.
Well, yeah, probably. I mean, most normies just don't care,
The Normans.
The normies.
Yeah, I mean, it's bread and circuses. What was the Roman who said, "Give them bread and circuses, and they'll never revolt."
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what we're seeing.
Between the NFL and the stupid sports and
The
all this,
other-
and the gambling, and
Woke sports.
keep everybody distracted and stupid.
The
Legalize pot, give them everything.
Yeah, they want you to be complacent and stupid.
Yep.
I mean, that's what the government's job is.
And they
That way they can steal your money and your freedom.
and they sure as heck wouldn't like this podcast. They wouldn't like us talking freely, even about Lee Jackson Day.
Mm-hmm.
They hate us so much because we identify with the Confederate, with the Southern heritage.
Well,
And-
anybody that who has read any of the biographies, even short descriptions of either of these men, will recognize the great character they had.
Yeah.
They were better men than anyone I've ever known. Frankly, you read their quotes and what they believed in and their values. And something people forget in the 19th century, especially around the war, officers weren't just somebody who, got elected and became officer or were appointed. Great officers had that charisma and that character that men wanted to follow.
Yeah.
Men wanted to follow because they're natural leaders and they have the quality to be leaders.
And they had to have great character and great integrity. And men could see right through that stuff. Not to mention personal courage and all the other elements. But if they didn't have that, that's what makes Lee and Jackson so amazing. And then tying that into secession, Lee and Jackson, especially Lee, and I'm pretty sure Jackson too, was opposed to secession.
Yes.
Lee, of course, like Virginia, did not want to be a part of the secession situation and
movement,
and was very much at the last minute. It only took like the last 4 states. It was only when Lincoln invaded with 75,000 troops, and people have to remember that.
Even before he invaded, the first vote in Virginia was not to secede.
Yeah.
The second vote was to secede, and the difference was Lincoln had issued a call for volunteers for states to provide their militias to put down the rebellion. Now, the Upper South, who did not secede, had to pick a side.
Yeah.
Because
they either would have to send the troops or
right. Now you're either on our side or their side. Pick one. Right. Because there's no more middle ground. And Governor Letcher, in his response to Lincoln, calls him out on it. He says, this is unconstitutional, and you have inaugurated a civil war. It's not constitutional for you to invade sovereign states. I don't have the governor's response to Lincoln's call for volunteers in front of me, but anybody that gets a chance, read it one time, because there's no mention of slavery. There's mention of Constitution.
Right.
So that time between the first and second vote makes all the difference for the Upper South. And that difference was Lincoln's call for arms to put down the southern states.
And that goes to show you this, and we talk about character and integrity of Lee, and you put Lee and Lincoln together, and it's like putting evil next to good. And people have to understand because we talked about this in the last podcast, in the part 1 of the secession talk, but Lincoln was pure evil and a liar. I mean, aside, yes, he was a politician, a legislator, and we know what great presidents they make. But he was a bald-faced liar. And then you put someone with Lee, who had the integrity to evaluate the situation and not jump into it. And let me speaking of that, I wanted to talk real briefly on Lee, because it fits into the secession thing. So, because Lee saw that Lincoln had violated something sacred, and Lee looked to God. Okay, to him, Lincoln had violated. He had violated a sacred principle, unalienable rights that come from the laws of nature and of nature's God. Neither Lincoln or Lee, slavery, we talk about slavery as the cause of the war, and that was the reason the states were seceding or whatever. Slavery was not on Lincoln or Lee's mind, okay? They just were not. so only later would Lincoln use slavery, of course, in emancipation, but early on that was not the case.
Well, only 4 out of 11 of the Confederate states even mentioned slavery in their declarations of secession.
Right.
And that was
Not a majority.
That was from the original 7
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
Well, and keep in mind, there were no laws against slavery either.
No,
You
it
know?
is something that always had been throughout mankind. Name the one civilization.
The whole
that never
point
had it.
is, though, that there was no, well, you all have heard this before, no major political party had put forth any plan for emancipation at all in the period before the war.
Right.
And I think that's shocking to a lot of people because I think people get the idea that, yeah, this was kind of declared, and the South resisted it on the basis of
Right.
maintaining slaves, and so they invaded to enforce something legal, which they did not.
Right.
In fact, and a lot of people don't realize what the cotton states were really afraid of. You had these people that coming down, harassing the situation, trying to cause slave revolts and things like that, and they didn't have confidence that Lincoln would be, offer any protection against this kind of thing. You have these people come down, they're trying to cause chaos intentionally.
Well, not only that, Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in some southern states.
10 southern states. Yeah,
10. Was it 10?
It was 10. Pretty incredible. And he only got about, he got less than half of the vote in the North, too.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of candidates. So, first past the post.
Well, sorry, we cut you off.
No, that's good. I mean, the only thing I'd say is that, like Jefferson, like a lot of the founding fathers, they realized that this was a contract between free states that agreed to or mutually agreed to come together to form a constitution to create a very limited government.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is on Lee's mind, and that's why we hold Lee in such esteem. But remember the quote, "Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed." And so Lee was an army man. He had served his country all this time. He was not in favor of just breaking up the Union. That's people who think Lee is, he's all for slavery and he's a secessionist and blah, blah, blah. What a bunch of crap. This man thought long and hard about what was, and he saw war too. Remember, he was right up in the front in the war with Mexico and other ventures, and so he thought long and hard before deciding. And what he came down on is his own state, the concept of the state's rights from the 10th Amendment, but also from the Constitution, and his native Virginia. And everybody should emulate that. Everybody should emulate that. Why do you want to put allegiance to some giant federal, central government? But there were people at this time, and that's why you put Lee and Lincoln together, and they're diametrically opposed in total belief systems. And Lee is the man that everybody hates and is putting down, and Jackson too.
It's
and these men freed slaves. They had, as we talked about before, Aaron. He freed slaves during the war.
Lee,
and they weren't his
Lee,
slaves really, because he inherited them.
Yeah, they were his. He basically acted on behalf of his wife, and inheritance from her father, and freed slaves. Was it 1862, I think. But interestingly enough, Lincoln was in the same situation. Keep in mind, he was married to the daughter of one of the largest slave owners in Kentucky. I think people forget
the Todds.
Yeah.
So
women in those days, weren't really, emancipated. Their husbands handled their affairs for them. So Lincoln, and there's documentation that pops up every now and then where it shows that Lincoln sold slaves when they came into his possession. He didn't free them.
Yeah.
And
So, if nobody, just look it up. If anybody questions anything that we say on this podcast or facts, go look it up.
yeah, this is
Please,
This is
because
on the record. It's
yeah, I mean,
it can be
and look into the fact too that after the war, after Lincoln died, his son tried to burn and try to destroy
He went
an enormous
into
amount
his
of documents and records. Of
yeah, he went
Lincoln.
in there and just burned boatloads of stuff, and took and.
I mean, he pulled a Biden and put it in his Corvette or something, right? Whatever.
Some top secret documents. But yeah, well, it's funny. In the 4 years Lincoln was in office, bribery was totally legal in those days. There were no laws against it, and people did it. And Lincoln made over like $1 million just from being in office for 4 years.
Yeah,
which was an outrageous amount
Unheard
of money,
of.
in today's dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as I've mentioned before, keep in mind he was a lawyer for the railroads leading up to then. It's not like he was some godly figure. He was a high-paid lawyer, and he was kind of a wheeler and a dealer. Some of the people in D.C. when he was president thought he was stupid and thought his wife was actually kind of the one who motivated a lot of what he did, and that he wouldn't have done it himself. But he was a pretty wealthy lawyer. And as I've said before, I think it was after the first Battle of Bull Run, he actually called Congress back into session to discuss the railroads, and I forget which one it was, but he designated one of the terminal points in a town. I'll have to look this up again because this isn't going to be very specific, but basically where he had a lot of property. He clearly served his own interests in ways that he would, do the whole. But that was a priority for him, even throughout the war.
I have some quotes on secession, which I thought I copied these out because I wanted to read a couple of them. There's so much information on when you talk about the appropriateness of secession, or why would Southern states want to secede, and all you hear about the war between the states is slavery, and that you can be brainwashed and buy into that all day friggin' long. But there are many other legal and constitutional schools of thought which played into the Southerners' perspective. And I'm going to read it. I'm going to read this one here. And this is from a Brigadier General Eppa Hunton, and I think he's 8th Virginia. So he said, when the state, and this is really important to know the mindset, when the state of Virginia seceded from the Union, we believed that we had a perfect right to withdraw and had no intention in the world of disturbing the Union forces or interfering with the United States government in any way. And if they had remained on the north side of the Potomac, we would have kept our place on the south side, and there would have been no shedding of blood. All that Virginia asked was to be left alone, to pursue her course under the new order of things brought about by secession. When the federal government invaded the state of Virginia without provocation and undertook to drive our people away by violence and force and opened their guns upon us to slaughter them by wholesale, there's no wonder that our people fought them with desperation. So, when we're talking about secession, this is how Southern people felt, and a lot of Northern people felt. A lot of even the Copperheads felt, who tried to fight Lincoln during the war and got imprisoned for it. But just remember, on the eve of, and this is I'm going to read another fact here that you guys have to look up. 1860 census in Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas, and Tennessee, 52.4% of Southerners, lived in those 4 states, which means that a majority of the Southerners in power in 1861 seceded over the central federal government's stated objective, which was to invade the Deep South. and thereby violate the U.S. Constitution as a voluntary union compact. So, I mean, that's really important to know where the Southerners stood on the side of the Constitution. They stood on. It was Lincoln who invaded. It was the Republican Party, the abolitionists, the Northerners at the time, who wanted a piece of the action in the South, and they were going to. And Lincoln concocted this horse crap show to get his teeth into the Southern states. And you'll see this repeated time and time again. And that's what you won't see in today's public. That's what you won't see in the school system, the institutions. Modern historians are full of crap. I'm telling you, it's all there. So, but I want also, because we're going to talk about the 10th Amendment. So, do we have the 10th Amendment pulled up? Because we don't know anything by heart. We got to read it. Why don't you read it?
The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. I mean, it's plain as day.
Yeah, I mean, it's that is a huge basis of how all states were formed, and that is what is, you know,
Well,
that's the purpose of secession too. I mean, the state rules the federal government, not
Right.
the other way around.
Yeah.
And yes, we have elected officials, we have representatives in our form of government, and they act upon the people of the states. They're elected to do so.
that,
Okay.
that is the basis of limited government. I mean, the Constitution says very specifically what the powers shall be.
Right.
And for the 10th Amendment to say all others are reserved for the state, well, we're way past that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's off the charts now.
Yeah, I mean,
And I don't understand why why you don't hear that more.
Well, it's because we're living in.
They control the narrative.
They control the narrative.
Well,
They're
and-
Marxists, and
a lot
we're
of people
way off the deep end now.
also, I mean, all that's true but a lot of people don't realize there's anything wrong. You know, this has been that, you know, we've come off a big Cold War where, you know, the nation had to be, you know, the larger, the federal side of things was so important for military reasons all throughout the 20th century, you know, and our culture has just been geared
To
so
fight
much.
the wars,
Yeah, to fight
for the
wars.
nation and everything, and so it's been accepted, and don't realize that they've actually given up everything.
And seriously, there's no one alive today that remembers it any other way. Well, and of course, that was really the consolidation was the thing that was specifically rejected during the founding originally of the United States, and the 10th Amendment was put in there. They should have used the words, you know, state sovereignty, these types of things. They didn't use those types of that type of language back then. You know, they would refer to, you know, the states being in a state of nature or something like that. But there were consolidationists back then, and they didn't get their way. But as soon as the Constitution was formed, they started trying to consolidate things. And of course, it ended up happening. They ended up getting their way at the point of a gun under Lincoln, and it's just kept on getting bigger. And you know,
I mean, just think of it. Why not? Why is it such a big deal? If and I mean, from modern times to back then, you're forming a union for a reason, almost like, you know, back on the frontier, the pioneer days, where you're forming a group of families, maybe 100 families, into a fort. You're all working together. You know it's temporary. You know it's got to be limited because you're really just trying to survive because the Indians and the French are attacking you all the time. You're doing it for a specific purpose for a specific period of time. Even the Pilgrims up and the Yankees did that.
Mm-hmm.
So who the heck would want to stay under that constricting thing? Why would you not want your own homestead someday?
right?
Which is what they did do. So you take that and you expand that to the United States government. The same principle is the same. People, the states, if that community becomes so terrible, you should have the right to leave that community. If you're in an HOA and you know it sucks, because everybody hates an HOA now, except for some people who love to be controlled, right? But you don't need to stay in that HOA. You're going to have to move.
Yeah, but you have the choice.
But you have the choice. It's not easy, just like the Constitution says, not for, transient reasons or small disagreements. It has to be something significant. And if your freedom and your happiness in this world is so affected, you cannot be coerced to stay into an agreement or a contract or a union. And this is unless the other party doesn't want you to leave because there's something to gain, an economic, whatever it may be, which is...
They need your resources.
They need your resources. They need your money. That's what it always comes down to. And for them to force you to stay into something, that's insanity.
Right. Oh, so, well. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly unjust.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of tyranny.
Yes.
It's like, no, you can't force me. I will be there under my own or my family's own, will voluntarily join, and then you'll get my cooperation until you start doing something funky, till you start doing something bad or evil or whatever.
Right.
And then I'm out.
Yep.
What's wrong with that? So, but I wanna read real quick on that. This is something. Now, there's the New York Times. They wrote an article about John C. Calhoun, and they took it totally out of context, like the New York Times would, and called him a traitor, and this is what traitors do, and whatever. But just listen to the words, because
God, that's so absurd that they would do that.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't part of the secession movement even. It's like he was dead 11 years before the war.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this is in 1831.
But he's a constitutionalist.
But he's a constitutionalist, right?
And he also considered himself a unionist. Strangely enough, he wasn't just right in a just way, of course. But
read it. I think he's one of the most underrated figures in history.
So the New York Times. So he wrote this. This is his Fort Hill address, July 26, 1831, and the New York Times calls this. I don't know if he called it at the time a doctrine of secession. Okay. And they published this and sided with the notion, the doctrine of all traitors, without improvement, modification, or emendation. And I want you to, there's a couple things here, and I want you to wait for the Frankenstein, I call it the Frankenstein moment of this speech, or this address, because it's so typical of the Northern thinking, and even today, anybody who is just intoxicated by centralizing everything in central government. And let me read through this real quick, and you'll see exactly what I talk about, the Frankenstein moment. So John C. Calhoun, and this is a quote, that the Constitution of the United States is in fact a compact to which each state is a party, and that the several states or parties have a right to judge of its infractions. And in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of power not delegated, they have the right, in the last resort, to use the language of the Virginia resolutions, quote, which was to interpose for arresting the evil and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them, end quote. This right of interposition, thus solemnly asserted by the state of Virginia, be it called what it may, state right, veto, nullification, or by any other name, I conceive to be the fundamental principle of our system. Against these conclusive arguments, as they seem to me, it is objected that if one of the parties has the right to judge at infractions of the Constitution, so has the other, and that consequently, in case of contested powers between a state and the general government, each would have a right to maintain its opinion, as in the case when sovereign powers differ in the construction of treaties or compacts, and that, of course, it would come to be a mere question of force. The error is in the assumption that the general government is a party to the constitutional compact. The states, as has been shown, formed the compact, acting as sovereign and independent communities. The general government is but its creature. A government emanating from a compact between sovereigns and partaking in its nature and object of the character of a joint commission appointed to superintend and administer the interest in which all are jointly concerned, but having beyond its proper sphere no more power than if it did not exist. For each party, state, has a right to judge them under our system of government. The final cognizance of a question of contested power would be in the states, not in the general government. On no sound principle can the agents have a right to final cognizance as against the principles, much less to use force against them to maintain their construction of their powers. How the states are to exercise this high power of interposition, which constitutes so essential a portion of their reserved rights, is a question that the states only are competent to determine. So I can't think of such a well-written explanation of the positioning of general government versus the states. And this is what the New York Times, you see, the politicalness of the New York Times, obviously, but that aside, you know, the position of a lot of people that think like this, and that's where I go to the Frankenstein comparison. The quote is, "The general government is but its creature."
Right.
You can picture Dr. Frankenstein putting together with all the different parts, and he's mad, right? He's nuts. He's putting together all of this monstrosity, right? And all of it's, stealing a brain, an abnormal brain from the Young Frankenstein movie, and all of this stuff, and trying to put it into this body, and using a lightning bolt to create this, like on with little bit of power. And he's intoxicated by this monster. He's intoxicated by this creature that he's created. That is, I cannot think of a better Frankenstein comparison, because and this is John C. Calhoun recognized this in 1831.
Well, he's right. He's making it quite clear that all these sovereign states come together to create the one general government, limited. What the New York Times is scared of is local rule, self-rule. They can't, if you have all these sovereign states who are running things the way they want to run them, and undoubtedly the culture of Louisiana is much different than the culture of Massachusetts or New York. Mm-hmm. So why in the world, in what world does it make sense that one general law from the almighty federal government is appropriate for those two different cultures?
One size fits all.
Yeah.
So the Times is scared that people are going to have self-rule, local rule, and live the way they want.
Well, and I mean, there's even amongst a lot of Republicans, because obviously the Times is a very liberal publication, but a lot of Republicans are Hobbesians. They really see salvation through the state.
Yeah.
And that's something very important to realize. So limited government is not something they really can go for. And people don't remember that. Yeah, Hobbes had some good ideas, but he wasn't when it came to that type of talk. Leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you have a lot of people that are supposedly conservative, but they're not for limited government at all. So them plus all of the liberals, there's no reason why it doesn't go away. Not only that, everything's centralized. Both political parties in this country are centralized. All of the corporations and large moneyed interests that support them have an interest in a one-stop shop. Be a lot more expensive for everybody to do different things in different states. of course, that's
be a lot more free.
Might be a
that's
lot
part of
more
the point.
free, which is
That's
their problem.
my whole point, though, is like, yeah, for them, you can see why they don't go for it. But yeah, I mean, you can see it should be so obvious. Why is it so difficult to be free? That's, well, it's just been eroded for so long and institutionalized.
Freedom of choice, freedom of competition brings down prices and gives you more options.
Yeah, the market, the real free market, not the
Right.
not the government crony.
But they'll
Yeah,
always,
yeah.
but see, the other side always calls it, the centralized government freaks. They always say that you're, oh, but there's evil in that, you know, the evil this or that. No, the evil is the corporate out of control stuff, which is a centralized power in and of itself in a way.
Right.
But really, the freedom to buy, sell, trade, to produce, to distribute goods and services, that is freedom. You don't, the government always says that the purpose for a regulation or a law that's 10 lawyers have to get on and jump on is there's some evil,
Right.
or there's some, and granted, there is evil,
Right.
but I mean, sovereign people can figure out how to fix that evil. And you don't need the federal government
Right.
bailing you out of everything or creating a law every time someone falls down and gets their knee.
And that's the other thing. Yeah, like you always get some type of federal law that's always invoked, and everybody's in everybody else's business. You know, they're doing something up in Alaska or they're doing something in California. Let them. You know, that's kind of the federal spirit. You know, you've got to be willing to let people do stupid things and not move there.
Exactly.
You know, and you can see all the people voting with their feet coming from California these days. Unfortunately, I think they're bringing their politics with them. But well, it's good they have the choice at least to leave. But and thankfully, what they do in California doesn't directly affect us here. But other than giving a lot of people ideas who agree with some of their dumb policies that we have to fight here. So I guess in that sense, it's not so great.
It does affect what happens out there is the testing ground, and
Yeah.
and where those back here want to go
Right.
eventually.
Yes,
So I
that's
mean,
kind of what I was
it's
getting
putting
at.
it on
Yeah.
the board, unfortunately, for the sheep to be led.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
well, I'm encouraged by a lot of the nullification movements that are happening.
Mhm.
And I think that needs to continue. But yeah, there's going to be an American reckoning at some point. Our the federal constitution. Well, that's another thing. They're always talking about the national, our national democracy, you know, and how
Right.
that's always in danger. They don't realize we don't have a democracy.
We don't have a democracy. We don't
Yeah.
have a direct democracy.
We supposedly,
Yeah, but the thing
by
that,
default, we kind of do these
the
days.
things that they're saying is going to destroy democracy are the things that make us free.
Right.
You know, it's
Yeah.
only they throw out these terms that are they forget the definition of the words, that it's not appropriate for what they're saying.
No, it's rhetorical language that they're
Yeah.
using, you know. So the meanings are definitely skewed. But yeah, we're supposed to have a federal republic. I don't even know why they call it the federal government anymore. I mean, I guess just because that name has been there, and it was federal at one point, but it really hasn't been functionally federal in a long time, probably at least 100 years, possibly 150. But yeah, the whole federal aspect has been completely eroded. You know, that was one of the things that you know, most recently in my life, you know, got me back into the kind of the historical study. You know, I've always been a fan, but you know, going back and saying, you know, where did we lose this? You know, well, it was during the so-called Civil War.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, it was all about saving the Union,
and
or you know, slavery, but saving the Union, you know,
and what did that mean?
what did that mean? It
By the way,
means different.
The northern states, many of them, if not all, published reasons they went to war, and none of them mentioned slavery. by
Nobody
the way.
mentioned slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah, slavery was a political gimmick, and the sickening part is you want to talk about truth and history. You have to really look at the documents. You have to look at what people said,
The primary
and
source.
not just the newspapers, what they wrote letters about. What Congress was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Even those, and if you're a real true historian, you'll look at what the opposition said, not
Right.
what the victor said, or the favored party at the time. Look at people who were like, wait a minute, what are you doing?
Yeah. What were the dissenting voices?
And the dissenting voice.
We're fortunate enough to have that still, just you go back in history and we've got to go only on what the victors said all too often. But yeah, this is all so recent. And I mean, there's so many primary sources you can still access, thankfully, until they
remove them.
Well, and they have been for a long time. They've been destroying a lot of things over time.
Yeah, I mean, they're destroying an entire culture right now. It's called the Southern heritage in the South.
Yeah.
And those of us who, try to say something on a podcast, or write an article, and Google basically censors you. Everybody and all the little snarky people out there on the left and the liberals and whatever, they think they're so freaking smart or whatever. And it's so arrogant. It's so incredibly arrogant. Not that they even care.
No, they don't.
Because they don't.
A lot of them aren't serious too, especially the snarky people. They're just out there to get their jollies off messing with people. They're not, they're not really trying to learn anything or, if I hear something that I think is weird, which I think a lot of them do, when we start talking about anything good about the South,
right?
I'm usually like, really, why does a person think that? I'd actually want to understand, where they're coming from, and because if I think I'm right, that'll give me a way to pick it apart, and if I find that they're correct along the way, it'll give me a reason to change my opinion. Sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's how normal people.
Well, for a lot of people, it's just an ego thing. Some people just like to, drive fast on, in their cars on the road. What do they got in their lives? And then, so all they have is life's just kind of a race to them. They just want to go fast. They just want to win. There's no real truth to be had. There are a lot of people like that, especially lawyer types. A lot of times they like to argue just for the sake of arguing.
Yeah,
they're good at arguing. It's about maneuvering. It's about winning the moment. And it's not about any kind of truth.
I think one problem that I'm seeing today is the shutting down of debate.
Mm-hmm.
So even for lawyers or people who enjoy, I mean, you're seeing one side of the equation completely shut down.
Right. Well,
and
what's the goal? Is the goal to serve their interests, or is it to actually discover a better understanding of what reality is, in other words, truth?
Right. And it's not. To me, I mean, look at our own Congress. Nobody debates anymore. You watch C-SPAN, like you were saying.
Yeah, there's no deliberation.
There's no deliberation at all. Nobody's arguing. You could pass a $1.5 trillion bill, and no one
is
sitting there in the Congress doing their job.
Yeah,
going back and forth, just discussing the bill. And now the liberal, the Democrat side is like, well, we'll just read it when we see it.
Right.
We'll just
right.
They don't even care anymore.
Yeah, they're not there. It used to be the only desk provided for people in Congress was the desk in the chamber where they sit.
Yeah.
Now they have congressional office buildings where all their offices and their large staffs were. People, they didn't really have staffs back in the day. Now people in Congress have become are kind of just like, I mean, seriously, you heard about this ATF thing where they came out with the shoulder braces. They just made that up. Somebody in the ATF just made that up.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that is an unconstitutional delegation of legislative authority. They're not supposed to be able to do it, but administrative agencies have been doing that for at least 100 years at this point. Congress and of course the argument is, we have too complicated technical society. Congress people can't possibly be able to know these things. Well, That's true, but there are ways to front load it before the legislation goes through, rather than just write a blank check to all these executive agencies to make up the law.
Yeah.
You know, because and so on top of that, a lot of people don't realize the average representation in Congress is
It's like 800.
750,000 for
Yeah.
people to one representative. I mean, who thinks that's adequate representation?
So again, more reasons to think about secession,
Right.
you know, in the modern times, and there's no reason why we can't. I don't see anything wrong with secession.
Yeah.
To me, we've got a corrupt system. It's not working. And they're basically taking our money through taxation and everything.
Through
I mean,
coercion.
I'm not just some libertarian, you know, that doesn't believe in law, or, you know, doesn't believe in some form of taxation or law, whatever. I just believe in it in the way it was intended.
Right.
And if it metastasizes and gets corrupted, well, then scale it back.
Well, and here's the other thing. It's not like the Constitution was changed and our society was made new. It was either forced through at the point of a gun, or they do an end run around the law by getting court rulings and things like that. So it's not like all the law, and because of that, thankfully, every once in a while, and it's got to get all the way to the Supreme Court, they have to, you know, it has to be recognized, thankfully. But yeah, it's not like, because you can change the Constitution. You know, Congress could change the Constitution if there was enough support to do it. You know, you can change the Constitution. It's called amending it. You know, you don't want to be making amendments, you know, carelessly, but still, they didn't. So that's one of the reasons why everything's kind of so illegitimate. It's so institutionalized and has been for such a long time, but it's technically against the rules. And I mean, and it's not just a technicality, by the way. I mean, it's and of course the government breaks its own rules, grants itself, you know, there's all kinds of sovereign immunity for police officers and things like that. But yeah, the federal government breaks its own rules all the time, you know. And think about all the things that have been done through government agencies all throughout the 20th century. And you know, well, and so yeah, there are those who believe that government is well, I've said this before. Government, that there are those who believe that government is a you know, an organization for like the betterment and improving of humankind, rather than guys like us who would probably consider it more of a necessary evil, because all government
Well, they believe
all they can do is negate freedom.
They don't even recognize freedom
got.
in their soul anymore. So they've granted it over to the government, almost like a president has given his power over to.
And there have always been people that want to rule, and you know, and this is just part of, you know, human beings, unfortunately, and we're seeing it rear its ugly head again for, you know, I mean, which it's always happened. It has never not happened in all of human history, and I think people don't realize that, you know. But the problem with that is, you know, if it's basically something you can count on, that's one of the reasons why. I mean, basically, power will always run away. It will run away with itself and take over. It'll just start getting into every, you know, get a pry bar in every little crack, you know, and over time just get, you know, more and more. And it's always happened all throughout history, you know, and it even goes on similar cycles. You know, you'll have these great civilizations and they kind of have a struggle and they, you know, they claw their way up and, you know, then they're on top and it's going great, you know, like Rome, like the West, you know, everywhere on the planet. And then they start getting lazy, you know, because they've succeeded. Life's too easy. Generations live in you know, without the same challenges. And then some other culture comes up, you know.
It's best to break these things up, which, you know, hopefully that's the beauty about the American founding fathers and the system that they tried to create, is that it has a way to check all this. It has a way to keep it limited. It has a way, if people would, unless it becomes so corrupted, which it has become. And so what is your alternative? Which brings us back to the secession topic. And, you know, I think,
and, you know, back to the 10th Amendment, you know, relating to the secession side of things, what happened to the 10th Amendment? Well, people may not realize this, but All of us know this, but senators did not used to be popularly elected. The 17th Amendment, they used to be appointed by the states. And so that's how the 10th Amendment had its teeth. Individual states had their people in Congress.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be the mechanism to enforce, at least probably one of the most important ones, to enforce the 10th Amendment. But now it has no teeth. There's nobody that pushes for the state. And of course, after the so-called Civil War, they all the states started behaving kind of like counties anyway, and exacerbated the problems, institutionalized a lot of bad practices. But
I'm going to read one more quote here, and then we can each close it up and talk, last words on secession here. And then we can bring it up again, but there's so many topics in this area, and then some of the modern stuff too. But so this is taken from the book. It's called War Crimes Against Southern Civilians. It's an incredible book. If you really want to look at it, I mean, it'll make you mad in a way, because it's just the amount of tyranny that went on in this situation in the South during the war between the states is just appalling. But this is from an abolitionist. And we talk about people who resisted Lincoln and were disgusted with Lincoln and appalled by Lincoln. This is one abolitionist, Lysander Spooner, and these are his words. And this is a guy who spent his lifetime fighting slavery.
He was an actual abolitionist.
He was an actual abolitionist,
not
correct?
Just an anti-slavery person,
right? But he had nothing to rejoice about with Lincoln's war in the South. But he wrote, the principle on which the war was waged by the North was simply this: that men may rightfully be compelled to submit to and support a government that they do not want, and that resistance on their part makes them traitors and criminals. No principle that is possible to be named can be more self-evidently false than this, or more self-evidently fatal to all political freedom. Yet it triumphed in the field and is now assumed to be established. If it really be established, the number of slaves, instead of having been diminished by the war, has been greatly increased, for a man thus subjected to a government that he does not want is a slave. So, and that's the end quote. And this is, I mean, I cannot see how that cannot be more
That's a great quote.
poignant.
And especially in today's society, everyone, pretty much the whole society, we are slaves to the federal government.
Right.
Not through our desire or our own doing, but I guess in a way our own doing, and the people that voted for giving up their personal freedoms for whatever law, new regulation, new anything, and not fighting the expansion of power in the federal government.
We are slaves.
Those are true. Yeah, those words are as true then as they could be today.
Well, you all have heard of Tax Freedom Day, right? I forget what institute does this, but basically they calculate how many days a person has to work to pay all their taxes,
right? And
then they see how far into the year that comes. So for how many months of the year are you working for the government? And it's appalling. It's like April, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's insane. And so basically, I mean, that's actual slavery is what I was getting at. You know, you are required, otherwise you will go to jail, or your property will be taken, or something like that, to do this. You know, you are coerced into doing this, and for what going on a quarter of the year at least.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just,
I mean, that's
people just accept this like it's so.
Well, you know, we've grown up that way, and you know, also, when we all were kids, the Cold War was going on. There was a different sense of nationalism than there is now. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe there just was for me because I was young and I hadn't learned about all this kind of thing yet. But yeah, it kind of goes back to that. We had a century full of big wars and cold wars and all these types of things, and communism and fighting that all over the place. And
Well, now
so yeah,
communism is cool.
you'd want America. You want America to win in those situations.
Yeah.
Is what I'm getting.
Now
it's understandable how people fall into that. It's okay. It's not bad to be patriotic. That's not what I'm getting at all. But it might.
No, you can
like
easily see how that became, it just became part of our society.
Yeah,
and
people forget about the sovereignty of the state, the sovereignty of the individual, even.
But when times get tough, and when almost half the country actually wants communism, and then they get a dose of what it really happened, how it will really look. Wait till that happens.
Yeah. Well, and every single time.
By then it'll be too late.
Yeah. They're running around and screaming about historical slavery and things that happened farther back than anyone alive remembers or was part of. Yet they are making themselves slaves.
Right.
Yeah.
In pushing this form of Marxism or collectivism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
But yeah, they're becoming subjects.
They think they're pushing for this new world order. Well, I hate to tell you that they aren't part of the new world order that will come about. The oligarchs will be,
yeah,
but not the serfs.
Serfs,
and
they don't even realize they're cutting their own throats. They're putting their own head in the noose.
Yeah,
and it keeps getting tighter. And they better wake up.
The powers that be will need different people to stay in power than what they needed to gain the power.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what you're talking about. The keys to power. You've always got, it's seriously like Castro or somebody. They start kind of quietly getting rid of people that help them take over because once they're there. Yeah, that's a good example.
Well, hey, I got through this whole thing, and Todd didn't even ask me about my hat, didn't even give me any crap about it. So I'm feeling pretty good. Didn't have to do anything. But so secession is not a bad thing. And that's kind of the moral of the story. I hope, we could talk on and on about secession. It'll always come up in some of these podcasts. But, we're going to go ahead and.
Well, basically, it just comes down to self-rule.
Right. Self-rule.
Right. The sovereign people of a state, wanted.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's like it's not a bad word. It's okay. Secession. It's just, it's not something you want all the time, but it has to be a part of our history, and it has to be a part. And it's not what a lot of people have attempted to make it look like it is, like some big evil. It is not.
Right.
And
and we on our first podcast about this, we went into a lot of the history. So if anybody wants to, we kind of traced the history of secession in the North, in fact, and that whole thing kicked off with major time of secession, which is when we left Great Britain. That was a secession.
Yeah, and we were British subjects, and we wanted to secede from the crown, basically.
Yep.
And because of tyranny. But hey, we can talk on and on about this. So we just wanted to go ahead and close it out here. But thanks for joining American Reckoning podcast. And remember, go to YouTube, and then we're on Rumble now, and on YouTube it's at American Reckoning, and just kind of subscribe to our page. That'd be great. And so thanks for Todd for popping in, and Aaron, and we'll see y'all guys next time. So thanks.